Christian, thank you so much for the introduction. We've got a very, very young audience, so times of university aren't that long ago for you, but we're going back to uni anyways with a panel with 4 professors. It's going to be a very academic start into the day. We've got a scientific panel on the tokenization of assets and potential implications for the financial markets. I can introduce our moderator, Alexander Eisl. He's the scientific lead of the Austrian Blockchain Center. And the 4 panelists are Professor Alfred Taudes. He's entrepreneurial professor of the Vienna University of Economics and Business. And also big thanks to him because he is involved in the Austrian Blockchain Center as well, who is responsible for putting all this together. Professor Philipp Sandner, head of the Frankfurt School Blockchain Center. Professor Isabell Welpe. Okay, so the academic 15 minutes, right, apparently. I don't see Professor Isabell Welpe either, so she will join, but there is the 4th, Professor Edgar Weippl, Professor for Security and Privacy at the University of Vienna. I hand over to you, and thank you for being here, and we're looking forward to a very interesting discussion.
Thank you for the great introduction. Before we start with the panel and the introduction of the panelists, let me also thank Black Manta Capital Partners, Christian Alexander, for making this happen together with us, and also for the great research cooperations we've had now for like almost since the start of the Austrian Blockchain Center. I think we achieved a lot in that time period, especially the tokenization map that was also mentioned. I would also like to thank Moritz, my colleague, for working so hard to also make this happen, and everyone from my team, and as well the sponsors of the conference. So of course we are an application-oriented research center, so the scientific dimension and aspects of tokenization are very important to us. So it's my pleasure to moderate this really interesting panel today of 4 very well-known professors in this field. So let's hope Isabell can join us soon. I would just like to give a brief introduction and then just do an introductory round where you can say a little bit more about you. So to my right is Alfred, who has basically been with the Austrian Blockchain Center since the beginning, so is basically the founder, or one of the founders of the Austrian Blockchain Center, and before that also took a great part in setting up the crypto economics group at Vienna University of Economics, where I also stayed before I joined ABC. Then we have Philipp Sandner from the Frankfurt School Blockchain Center. He's a very well-known expert on digital assets, also the digital euros. I think we'll hear much from him on topics today. And Edgar Weippl from the University of Vienna and SBA Research, who's professor for privacy and security. And Isabell will join us soon. So let me just hand over to you. Maybe every one of you can give like a brief introduction, what you find interesting about this topic, what the main things are that make you curious, and why you're interested in that. Start with Alfred.
Yeah, usually it's better to be the last one because then you can summarize everything. I think the big challenge in the field is how can we marry the openness and the innovativeness of the current blockchain ecosystem with all the restraints that you have when you try to regulate that. On the other hand, I think there is no way we can avoid this task, because if you really want blockchain to go mainstream and cover more assets than in-game weapons or something like that, we have to deal with regulation. And the key point is these 2 systems are founded on totally different premises, and both have to co-evolve. So definitely, if you want to utilize the benefits of blockchain, the efficiency of the transparency, you have to change the regulation. And typically regulators, of course, they are usually not very entrepreneurial, because from the public sector and everything must be properly done in the legal setting. On the other hand, my personal experience with regulators is they are much better than what people think. So they are very innovative. They try to learn because they found that you have to understand things before you regulate them, which is of course a good thing. But still, these things take time. If you think about how long it took for MiCA, right? And very often, a clever regulation in the blockchain space has to look differently from the current regulation, because blockchain has some very nice properties that help you to regulate, right? Because we have the distributed ledger and so on. On the other hand, if you try to enforce old rules on the new system, I think we give up a lot of what this new technology has brought us.
Thank you. Philipp?
Yeah, Isabell just wrote me a WhatsApp. She's stuck in the taxi and she will come in 2-3 minutes. Then it's all done. Yeah, good morning, and very nice that you're organizing this conference, because there is not so much out there in terms of platforms in the area of security tokens or digital securities, or asset tokenization, as whatever you call it. I think there are three different very distinct domains which we have to really distinguish today. The one domain is basically pure crypto assets. The benefit is here, it's basically purely international. There are no boundaries here. Bitcoin is the same Bitcoin in Germany, in Portugal, in Indonesia, wherever. It's purely international. So that's basically the crypto asset domain. In Europe, it will be regulated by the MiCA. Then you have, on the other hand side, you have enterprise blockchain systems, where we now have to see very clearly that they did not work out at all, right? You still remember terms like R3 Corda, Hyperledger, VTrade, and all kinds of consortium. Where are they, right? With the beginning of Corona, that's 2.5 years ago, they basically suddenly disappeared entirely. And this will also not change anymore. So enterprise blockchain systems are, in my personal opinion, largely dead. This will not be able to be revived, with one exception, that's China. China is the only country on the entire globe who can basically innovate top-down, executing enterprise blockchain systems in the form of intranet type of solutions, right? And the interesting point, I think we should talk today, that's my understanding, is basically this middle domain where you have crypto assets as the base layer to transport assets, to digitally assign ownership of tokens. That's Ethereum, that's any other smart contract platform. And we have existing, let's call it legacy capital market formats like debt instruments, stocks, shares, participation rights, and all kinds of things, who are compliant with existing law, which are deployed on these middle type of infrastructures, such as Ethereum and so on. Why is this so interesting? Because it's a mixture between legacy capital market formats, which we know, deployed on crazy cryptocurrencies such as Binance, where there was a hack last night with 500 million being stolen, right? So imagine this, in case we would have talked about this 4 years earlier, this would not have been possible, because at that point of time, there was either the hard crypto asset domain or the enterprise blockchain domain. There was no in between. And now it's basically, it has gotten common sense to mix both worlds. You have Ethereum as the base layer, and you have all kinds of assets and securities on top of this. You also have stable coins on top of this, US dollar stable coins. You also have DeFi instruments, NFTs, and all kinds of things on top of these smart contracts. And of course, you have security tokens. And that's basically, I think, one point I would like to make in this beginning. And the second point I would like to make is, at some point of time, this only works when we have the digital euro, but not from the European Central Bank, but rather in the form of stable coins. Because then you can leverage these base layer platforms such as Ethereum, and you can make trading with cash and securities, where the trade is being executed by a smart contract. You can see that it works in the DeFi world. It does work there at scale. It's billions per dollar day by day, which are being traded with this mode. But for this, we have to have the euro stable coin there. It's not existing at scale yet. There are many reasons for this. One reason is, for example, that the MiCA regulation is creating so high hurdles such that stablecoin issuers for the euro are rather going to the US. That leads to the situation that we have 95% of US dollar stablecoins market share and less than 1% being denoted and denominated in euro, right? And this will also not change in the near future because MiCA hurdles are too high for stablecoin issuers. So those of you who might really want to leverage efficient trading, smart contracts who are taking over the function of clearinghouses and so on, they should rather go directly to the US because over there you have stablecoins. This will not change on the near future here in Europe, I think so. And why does it make sense? Because with stablecoins on blockchain systems and securities on blockchain systems, you can start with trading. And this trading becomes very efficiently because you do not have to have clearinghouses anymore. Just for those of you who are not so deeply connected into that part of the world, the role of clearinghouses is to reconcile two IT systems, the payment system for the euro or the dollar and the security settlement systems where the stocks are being registered. And since you have two different IT systems, you need somebody who reconciles this. That's the clearinghouses. The clearinghouse has personnel, has costs, has risks, needs time, needs an insurance. And this entire structure of a clearinghouse can be moved away when you move over to smart contracts. But for this, you have to have the currency in there. That's basically the two points I would like to mention at this early stage.
Thank you very much. So given recent events that Philipp just mentioned, I'm very happy that Edgar is here today, expert on IT risk and security. So maybe Edgar, you can say your introduction.
You nicely mentioned it, it's all software. So we have software infrastructure such as Ethereum that provides the basis, and then we build more complex stuff on top of that. But in the end, it's all software, and we all know how reliable software is. We have security issues with software, and what changes compared to other software security problems that we've had in the past is that it's much easier and much quicker to exploit. If you look at the damages that are caused by those software problems, they're always in the millions, maybe also going into the billions, things that we haven't seen in the past, at least not so quickly in other domains of IT security. And that you can make those exploits really quickly to money is something that changes the entire risk scenario. And what I think is important in this domain is that many people are excited about the technology and think of mainly using the technology and then coming up with some use case what they could use the technology for. But what we should, at least in my opinion, start with is looking at what do we actually want to do? Do we want to make small transactions where people invest in, I don't know, certain kinds of assets? Do we want to make them quicker, cheaper? Do we want to save on intermediates? What's the ultimate goal? And then decide what is a good technology, and then also take into account the risks that are caused. I mean, if you look at the technology stack that is involved in any token today, so it's basically a smart contract, which is just a program that is executed, that you write in a programming language that is then more or less compiled into an intermediate language that is executed on a virtual machine that is, if you think of Ethereum, that's a distributed system. This then again runs on different hardware, is connected in the network, and probably we don't really understand how the entire system really works in terms of what happens if for instance, we assume it's decentralized and we assume that there are point-to-point connections, which obviously there aren't, because if you think of different parts of the world, different points do not connect directly to another point, but everything goes through a couple of undersea cables. What happens if those links are broken or are slow for some time and then reconnected? How does such a system really behave in such situations? I mean, there are obviously simulations of what can happen, but when you move, as long as it's just part as small investments and not a large part of the economy, it doesn't really matter. Maybe some people lose money, maybe many people lose a bit of money, or maybe some people lose lots of money, but it wouldn't change the world. But if once you go ahead and move large parts of the economy to such a technology, you should know what the risks are, and you should really look at the technical details, because it's really hard to then move back. And when we talk about trustless, well, we do have to trust someone. We actually trust a couple of people that we don't really know. We trust the software developers, we trust the infrastructure providers, the hardware manufacturers, and since a lot of money is involved, it's perceivable that you embed malware, for instance, in certain kind of hardware that can cause some problems. So that's my take on it.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, maybe before I go to my next question, and I think Isabell is about to join us. Are there already any pressing topics from the audience that you would like us to cover in this panel? Yes, please.
Yeah, also I would also like to hear your expertise and your expertise, because I'm also not very sure. And why is this? Because there are not many analyses out there. Maybe also you can mention your opinion here. My feeling is, but I really might be wrong here, because this has not been investigated thoroughly. Why did Hyperledger and all these consortia, why did they fail? So that's my interpretation, right? Maybe you think they are not failing, they are still existing somewhere, but I don't see them anymore. So why in my words, are they failing or have they failed? In my mind, it's a governance issue, right? Companies come together and would like to jointly maintain and run a network. So that's the base layer of a blockchain system, right? So it's not just the technical stuff, which you elaborated on very nicely. It's also an organizational issue. When I go back in time, -3 years, there were so many discussions going on. We also had it with the ABC, the governance of blockchain networks and so on. It has been investigated. There have been open questions, but these questions have not been answered. Nobody was able to answer them, and nobody is able to answer them. I know some examples from the area of Stuttgart where they try to create like a blockchain network for the local industry, and the technical stuff wasn't the problem. But guys, the people sat together and then said, okay, now let's get real. Who is basically operating this enterprise blockchain network? Do we need an association or a company or a foundation? And if we now found an association, what are the rules to do this? Who can join and who can basically leave this association, and what rules? And once this gets basically very specific and people are sitting down, writing the legal document to operate and orchestrate this thing, this organization, this association, once this was basically the next step, then it stopped because lawyers took over. And don't get me wrong here, you need lawyers to do this, but of course one has this interest, and there's another interest, then you sit down and you discuss for weeks and years and quarters, and at the end of the day you have to agree that there is no common ground, and basically this cannot be solved with a distributed, democratized approach. That's my personal opinion. In case you would like to run enterprise blockchain systems, you have to have a top-down approach. Somebody has to say, okay, that's our blockchain network, please use it in case you wish, and if not, then please leave it. In China, this is being done by the government, but we don't have any entity in Europe who is taking over this kind of initiative, not the European Commission, not IBM, not Deutsche Börse, nobody, and therefore people are then stuck in these governance issues, and this leads to the death of all these projects. That's my interpretation. And now let's switch over to Ethereum and the smart contract systems there. These systems are simply there, and you don't need to have any governance of the systems level, because you simply program the smart contract, you deploy it on chain, you try to reconcile it with regulations, and then the system works. And you don't have to care at all about the lower level governance, because it's a public infrastructure like glass fibers in the street out there, and it simply works. Now you have to then look that data protection rules are considered and all kinds of other things are protected, but people have managed now to do this. And then why not just use this public infrastructure which is out there? That's my interpretation of what's going on. And if this is the case, then it also will not change, not in Europe, not in the US. and then we will also not see any enterprise blockchain systems.
Philipp, there's a question.
These are good points. Thank you very much. I was just thinking if you see a risk there and the hurdles on such an organization, it seems like the same problems could appear to DAOs. What is your opinion on that? Is it possible without a top-down management, or will the DAO be the future?
Yes, that's very difficult.
It's a very good question. Is the micro on? Yeah. Now, I mean, because DAOs are an organizational innovation, and you know, organizations exist because of transaction costs, right? So they lower transaction costs. Whatever you can do in a market, you should do in a market. And decentralization is marketization, and it will take place where it is more efficient than people coming together in an organization where they lower transaction costs. And I talked about this yesterday, and it depends on the task ahead. Some tasks are better addressed top-down, hierarchical. Hierarchies have great advantages, but other tasks, they're destroyed by hierarchy. So it will very much depend upon the DAO, its members, and the rules and governance structures the DAO gives itself. And you know, the opposite of democracy is not hierarchy. The opposite of democracy is tyranny. So you can come together democratically and give yourself a very hierarchical organizational structure if you agree that's the best structure for the types of problems and tasks your DAO is dealing with. And I mean, we're researching this right now, the structure of DAOs and the success correlates of DAOs. But my personal opinion is a lot of DAOs will die because the people founding them do not set up the appropriate structure. But it's interesting because now with a DAO, anyone who's out there thinks, I could run this organization better than my leaders, I could run this country better. Well, now they have a chance to put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, and give it a real try. But to all of you, I can recommend a recent post by Vitalik Buterin where he addresses exactly that, and he distinguishes between two types of decisions. Some decisions gain if you engage the wisdom of crowds. Yeah, the decision gets better, but other decisions lose if everyone has a say. And it depends very much on what type of decision you're dealing with, where we could see more value created by the swarm intelligence of a DAO.
So maybe
Thank you.
To come back a little to the first question, because I find that also very interesting, and Philipp and I discussed it already at the panel discussion we were a couple of months ago. And I think, Isabell, this is also something that you work on a lot. Maybe you can also comment on this. So, I mean, my view is a little bit different than that of Philipp, because like technically and from feature-wise, I find it very promising to do something like Corda or other similar technologies if they did not develop now because companies had other issues like the COVID crisis and similar things. I'm not sure, but maybe Isabell, you can comment on that as well. And before that, maybe talk a little bit about you so that all of our audience members also get a chance to know you.
The use of enterprise blockchains?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, have you asked yourself, where has Europe lost in the digital transformation? I personally think we have lost because we have no operating systems. And operating systems are the layer between hardware and software. They control the data, they control the apps, etc. But it's Apple CarPlay in our Bavarian cars. And so I do think, you know, enterprise blockchains and consortia could be very valuable in sort of bypassing the current technology infrastructure of the cloud system, getting one step ahead to control the interface between software and hardware, and to control all the interfaces. And we haven't had that, and blockchain offers the opportunity to sort of move ahead and onboard Europe and companies of a specific industry, whether it's insurance or whether it's mobility, to say to the world, look, we have a layer where you can develop apps, where you can where we solve the pain points of the current operating systems, and there are pain points, data security, you can't pay, you don't own your data. So all these things people would actually appreciate. So I think that's where they have a role to play. And without a doubt, you need more pre-competitive cooperation between companies that are part of the same ecosystem, so mobility or finance or insurance. So get together to set a dominant standard, because we still have Metcalfe's law. Whether you succeed is less and less decided by the technical quality. So digital success has nothing to do with technology excellence. Unfortunately for us, if that was the case, we would be leading. We're not leading. Yeah, we are a midget when it comes to the market power of digital markets. And markets are decided by adoption and by setting dominant standards and by making the public believe that even if today your market share is small, I mean, Tesla has a 1% market share, but has 50% of the automotive market cap, because people believe they will be the dominant standard in the future. And you cannot achieve that as a single company. You need to come together to do that.
I mean, maybe to go on to Edgar. So we talked a lot now about like organizational and other aspects, why one type of blockchain might be more suited than the other one. Maybe as a computer scientist, you can give your technical opinion about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing is, again, what do we want to achieve, and not which technology do we want to use in a consortium of a couple of companies. And in particular, if, as you mentioned, in certain cases, a top-down structure is beneficial, and if those companies work together, the question is, why would we want to use a blockchain? What is the real use case for that? And we've done projects with several companies, usually advising them on security, IT security aspects. But my main question is always, why do we want to use this technology? And in many cases, the answer was, well, it's a hype technology. We also want to play around with it. All others do it. But in many cases, a distributed database with using digital signatures can achieve, at least in my opinion, the same thing. So why do we need a technology, or why do we want to use a technology that is hard to use, where we don't find developers, that is still in its infancy? So there are a lot of changes in the underlying technology. Why not just buy I don't know, Oracle or any other database system that offers also distributed databases? Because yes, it does make sense to distribute things, and then implement the non-repudiation requirement through digital signatures, since people, at least partially, trust each other anyway. Then some companies said, well, Oracle licenses are so expensive, so Hyperledger or whatever is a little bit cheaper. But then again, this is also not the best reason to use the technology. So I think it's important to really know why you want to use a certain technology, and to start with the organizational aspects in the first place. So what do I want to achieve? What are my requirements? And then I decide which technology to use. And I guess that's why many cases failed, because no one really knew why they would want to use the technology.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. That's also something we saw, especially in the, early days. I mean, it's still not the most mature technology that has been around for centuries, but in the really early days, people just wanted to use blockchain for the sake of using blockchain, and not because it's the best technology for a given use case.
Which is fine if you just want to experiment with new technology. Yeah, that's.
Yeah. I mean, maybe to come back to a keyword that was mentioned a lot before, governance, which I think is really important, especially when things go wrong. Thinking about a stablecoin case that went sideways a little bit a couple of months ago, and then the discussion afterwards, how to deal with that and what to do with that. So I mean, governance is one of the research topics we think a lot about at VU and also at ABC. Maybe Alfred, you nodded quite often when it was mentioned before. Maybe you can shed some light on your opinion on how important it is and why.
Yeah, I mean, the Terra Luna case is a typical example where things can go horribly wrong. But if you look at the core reason why in the DeFi space these things happen. Well, these systems are marketed as decentralized, but if you look deeply, in some aspects they are quite centralized. Also simply because the technology is not ready, and every software is faulty, and you need somebody with a kill switch to stop the smart contract, and this person of course has the key to stop everything. It's necessary, but it's centralized, and typically there these big problems happen. The same with the bridges, and the stablecoin issue is still all things that we have is not properly working. I recently proposed to the Austrian National Bank to design the digital euro so that it could be a stablecoin.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can imagine what your reaction was.
But this would be I wanted to touch on this later on in a couple of minutes. You know, you have stable coins out there issued privately by, for example, Circle. You know all these things. The ideal stable coin would be basically a very small smart contract. This would have 2 pages of code, right? 2 pages. And the central bank is issuing the euro. The central bank is issuing the euro as a stable coin on top of Ethereum. Yeah. This would be the ideal world. But you will never ever in our life get the central bank to do this for reasons I don't understand, because they are closed-minded when it comes to trying to understand the technology. They are simply not understanding the technology.
Yeah, luckily I'm a professor, so they didn't kill me, right? If you're a professor, basically you have this space where they say, yeah, as a professor. And they are tolerant. Yeah, if I would be one of the employees, I think they would tell me, get your papers, 5 minutes out. I think it's purely, Bitcoin is evil, right? And it prohibits, but it would be a really good use case because the digital euro is a problem. You don't find other very cool use cases because you don't want to hurt the banks. So what is the utility for the citizen? Of course, the central banks make it because Bitcoin is evil, and we have to do something. So it's typically an innovation driven by the supply side, and this would be a very cool idea. And we have a lot of projects where we create artificial euro-backed money for specific use cases. We just started a project making an own coin for the care of the elderly, because there's a lot of cash. You know, elderly people don't trust people. The caretakers change often, right? And if you want to do that, of course, you define a digital curry pact to the euro, but you still have to go to the shops and say, please accept it. If we could simply take the digital euro, this would solve a lot of things, and it would bring back the euro relevance, because as Professor Sandner said, we are losing relevance in this international currency competition. And this would be a cool thing, but well, I don't like it. One point to these consortial blockchains, when I heard this Corda and R3 thing several years ago, it reminded me of the intranets that we had. Yeah. And they also everyone said, yeah, there's this wild world and this bad thing in the internet. We do it in our. Of course, it died because you have, of course, these complex governance issues, and you don't have the network effects. How will you compete with 200,000 developers out in the open space on Ethereum? Even if you're Deutsche Bank or somebody, yeah? Well, of course, only the Chinese can do that because they are used to this style of management. For us, it doesn't work. And I think the game will play out the same as in the classical internet. We will have a very open base infrastructure where everybody is. And then, of course, it depends on your smart contracts, whether they will succeed or not.
So it could have worked if an industry, whether it's Corda or the mobility industry, got together and designed an enterprise blockchain, but then opened it. Because essential success factor of Web 2 already was to open your company. In the old world, you were successful if you closed off your business secrets and you didn't open yourself up, but that has already changed in Web 2. And in Web 3, that'll go one step further, because if you open up, you gather data, you gather information from customers, you can customize your products and services, you can offer individual solutions, and that's what people pay for. People don't pay for one size fits all excellent products or services. And there's a great chance for Europe when it comes to Web3, because Web3 benefits companies and individuals who create, who produce. That's us. Yeah? We are not good at customer service, and Web 2 was all about customer pole position. The successful digital companies, they don't produce anything. They're just good at being at the customer pole position, at the interface, listening to what customers are telling them, listening to what developers are telling them. And you can tell if a company or an industry has understood that just by looking, do they have developer conferences? Do they hold developer conferences? Because in these conferences, you are letting others know, these are our interfaces. This is how you can collaborate with us. You can develop applications for our services and products. And it's exactly right what you said, that it's futile to try and develop something trying to compete with the world, because the new success factor is to develop something that can serve as a platform and allows others to contribute. And if you offer the platform, you will gain. So yes, it's a good idea to have enterprise blockchains, but they cannot be closed off like the intranet, because then they will fail. And by the way, on the central bank, I often think about what could make Bitcoin fail, because as Philipp knows, I'm puzzled that so many smart people who I think are smart in the financial world, simply ignore it. And so I'm trying to listen to their arguments, what are they saying? And so what I've heard is what could make Bitcoin fail is if we got a stable fiat currency. Okay, I said that will not happen, yeah. Yeah, and second, it's a power issue, because, Bitcoin and these currencies, they are about central bank decentralization. And just by that sentence, you will see they don't like it, right? Even if it's, I agree with you, a really good use case for the people.
I'm very happy that we have a very active audience today. Makes my job as a moderator easier.
So I'm sure you will all answer this from different perspectives, and I'm looking forward to hearing all of them, but I thought of the question because of the computer science perspective. And, I spent a lot of time talking to people about why not to use blockchain. Like 99.999% of the time, just go use a database and secure keys, and we know how to do this. But this panel is about the scientific approach, and lots of times poor technology choices win. HTML was not the best choice we had in 1992. Nevertheless, it's what we use. Blockchain may win in lots of cases, even if it's not the right choice. But my question is actually the other side of that, from the positive. The real use of blockchain was sort of solving trust in the trustless environment problem. But do we see any other positive scientific, not business application, but scientific reasons or state of the art in security tokens and blockchain in general about that benefit us, that can open up more opportunities, again, from the scientific perspective?
In terms of computer science, it's a distributed system. So what is for research interesting is that we now have a increased funding and interest in distributed systems. So there are many problems that have been lying around for like 30 years or so that have been addressed only by a few people, and now they become mainstream. There are things like, for instance, generating a random number in a distributed system. So you want the same random number, but it should be random in terms of not predictable, non-biased, and so that's an interesting computer science problem that can now be addressed, and we do need this, and this has important implications that once you move away from a proof of work, because if you use proof of some other mechanism, you don't have the random component, for instance, that you need for a leader election, and this is central to randomly select a leader for most blockchains. Otherwise, you have front running and other issues. So this is very interesting in terms of research. But what I also think, not just computer science, but again, kind of moving into the governance, is who has the power in such a system? And I think this is, we say, well, it's decentralized, but is it really, if you think of Bitcoin, is it really decentralized? What is the power of the miners? Is it the miners who have the power? Is it the users who kind of give value to a Bitcoin because they pay for that? Or is it the software developers, because there are not so many software solutions for the miners that they can execute? So, and again, it's basically people agreeing that something is as then written in software. So, I mean, famously, the hard limit of that there are only a limited number of Bitcoins is just because all people who run the software don't change this line of code that says the max Bitcoin. It's not a technical miracle or some crypto stuff. It's just people say, well, it's 21 million. Okay, then it's 21 million. But and we don't discuss how is this. We talk about consensus between the nodes that they agree, but some guy just wrote the software and said it's 21 million. But why do we agree? Is this the kind of decentralized democracy that we're talking about? If some unknown guy in some country or consortium just wrote a line of code and everyone just uses this, this is, I think, something that we should look into. And also the central role of usually we are in society accustomed to that if the software doesn't work, we have some person to override, some people who can override the decisions. Once we code everything, and we say, well, the code is the law, and we have no recourse in terms of if it doesn't work. That's something also completely new that I think we should consider. We were not too happy with how the Boeing aircraft, if the software overrode the human and it basically crashed because of faulty sensors. We said, well, the human has to be in control, and in terms of apps where it's like essential for us. I mean, we don't have, we wouldn't want that the pilot loads some open source fuel-saving app into the plane that was written by some guy, and then we say, well, it's open source, so it's going to work anyway, let's fly with that. I mean, you would not get on such a plane. So maybe if it's like a critical financial infrastructure, this is at least something that we should consider.
Any other response? Yeah, as concerning your question, we have to ask basically security tokens and also asset tokenization. But why do we want to have it, by the way? Why do we want to have it? And if you go back in time, a couple of years or even decades, then right now you already have all kinds of asset classes. You can purchase a vintage car or real estate object. There are leasing companies out there agglomerating thousands of leasing contracts and so on. So this works already, but it only works for the institutional investors, for those people who have millions and billions of dollars. That's basically their world, how they can invest in vintage cars, in real estate, and so on and so forth. Therefore, I think the possibility for smaller investors to also invest in all these assets, that's in my mind the key reason why asset tokenization makes sense, or basically expressing it in a more nice way, opening up asset classes which are closed to the normal investors, right? What does it mean very precisely? Take leasing cars, for example. There are a couple of leasing companies out there who are agglomerating 10,000s of car contracts for leasing contracts, and who is investing there? Pension funds and all kinds of huge companies, but nobody here in the room. So how can we open up such asset classes for the average investor? That's not just us here in the room, it's also family offices, it's smaller banks, and basically everybody who wants to participate in opening up these asset classes and basically adding liquidity to these asset classes. In my mind, that's the core purpose of why asset tokenization makes sense. Some people argue that with asset tokenization or tokenization of assets, we could also allow people easily trade securities across borders from here to Argentina and back. That's where I don't believe in, because regulation is really preventing this international traveling of securities. I don't believe in this argument, but I do believe in basically bringing down the setup costs for structures to opening up all kinds of assets to all kinds of investors. And now I think the key point is, why did this not work so far? Because you can package leasing contracts in existing organizations, but then you have to have huge corporations, you have to make them stock market listed, they need to be regulated and so on. So the setup costs is maybe $500,000. And with $500,000 setup costs, you have to have an asset value of say 100 million, such that it becomes efficient. When you now with asset tokenization are driving down setup costs to say 50,000, then it gets already efficient to basically handle assets valued at say 2 million. for example, and then this brings everything down. And I think this is basically the key rationale what we should work for, because this will work in the future. There is one company which you don't have on the radar yet. It will launch next week. They are using Liechtenstein stock entities for tokenization. Then they are using the passporting regime to bring these shares, these stocks, to Germany and to other European countries. And this way, I already tried the system out. I purchased one share in a vintage car for 18 euros, 18. So that's the lowest amount of possible investment, 18 euro. And I don't have a debt instrument, because in the inflation, with 10% inflation, I don't want to have a debt instrument because I'm losing money. I want to have an equity instrument. And that's what they offered me. I now own one share, also Aktie, one share of this single packaged vintage car sitting in Liechtenstein, passported to Europe, and basically using, in this case, the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act. And now the last sentence I would like to make, why do we need blockchain here? Why do we need blockchain here? I really thought about this a lot and talked with these guys for more than 1 year. The key reason why you need blockchain here is the following. Only with blockchain technology, you can move the share in Liechtenstein from paper into the digital world. Only with blockchain technology, by law, you can get rid of the paper share and move it over to a digital share. And why do you need it? Because only then, that's a key reason. Why do you need it? Because then you can make ownership transfer of shares without sitting down at a notary, having transaction costs, needing time, and so on and so forth. Because a notary appointment for sending shares from me to you takes us 3 weeks to arrange. It costs us 500 euro at least, and it makes basically trading impossible. So using blockchain to move over shares from paper into the digital world, just to remove the notary requirement for ownership transfers, is the key reason why blockchain makes sense. And then the implication is the following: you suddenly can trade it, and you have a liquid market 24/7 for vintage cars, real estate objects, and so on and so forth. That's in my mind, if you really distill it to the core, that's a key reason why blockchain makes sense.
It's a question.
Can I just ask you? I've got a microphone, yes. Professor Sandner, you mentioned family offices, right? There are hundreds and thousands out there, very different backgrounds, very different investment theses, strategies. You've got the young tech guy, right, who sold his business, sits on a few hundred millions. He's obviously very tech savvy. He's prone towards that. But then you've got the multi-generational, fourth, fifth generation industrialist German family. Maybe the principal has a collection of vintage cars, right? How approachable are they? Are you talking to them at all? How approachable are they to tokenizing maybe their own assets that they own? And how do you do this? Because I think what you said, a problem that we often have is education, people not understanding it. So how do we educate family offices? How do we get them to open their minds and being open to the tokenization of their own assets, or to invest in tokenized assets?
That's a very difficult question. I think, yes, education is key here. I think, as always, same with companies, same with family offices, some of them are very open, some of them are very closed. It's typically those who are open who have younger employees. In case you're talking to people 60 plus, then they are closed-minded concerning blockchain technology. But the younger ones, or if you, as you have said, in case there are children there, age 30, 35, 40, 45, then they are open, and they are open to both sides, investing and also tokenizing, for example, potentially their vintage cars. But right now, 2022, scalable solutions for tokenizing things at scale are not existing yet. So this is basically something I think which just will appear in the next 2 or 3 years. And as I see it, but I might be wrong, I think we need to have tokenization of equity instruments, of shares, because only then we have direct or indirect ownership, which is inflation resistant. Debt tokenization on behalf of retail investors doesn't make sense. I would never purchase like a bond tokenized thing with 5% interest rate while the inflation rate is 10%. So I invest and I have risks and I lose 5%. Why should I do this? I rather purchase Bitcoin.
Don't tell it to the central bank.
It's another question, huh?
are currently tokenizing a funds stake. And we had this question, and what we learned, we did some analysis here, is that the typical retail investor, he doesn't even understand the instrument. He doesn't understand that he's buying debt. And for that reason, I believe that you can go with that. But if you would want to go to a more educated investor, like a family officer or a family office, they would want to invest in equity. So I think it's different target groups, and you have to think, what are you going to sell? Which product are you creating? And there will be different solution in the future, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. So we're actually now in the 15 minutes we originally planned for Q&A. So I see some more questions there in the back. So maybe we just continue with questions from the audience.
Yeah, thank you for the insights. I would like to add an insight and perhaps also ask a question at the end of it, building up on what Professor Welpe expressed so beautifully. When I travel to Miami, Toronto, Barcelona, to these hackathons and sit across the table building solutions with these hackers who are 18, 19-year-old, the developer community, which is so burgeoning in the Web3 space, I realized that the underlying ethos of the community is based on the concept of composability, which is basically meaning that any piece of code that you're writing or any piece of software you're producing has to be able to be forked in the future. It has to be working qualitatively. There is a mutual collective responsibility that the entire Web3 developer community is working towards and ever so focused, which is very different from the ethos of the Web2. And I think that's something that we need to understand, that this composability, they always tell me, Jasmine, we have to think about the composability element. And I find that so refreshing. So I guess that would take care of the problems of quality and those kind of things in the future. But my question to the esteemed panel here, of course, with the Austria Blockchain Center and the Frankfurt School of Blockchain, and of course, the wonderful work Professor Welpe is doing in this space, we have in the academia made strides in this space. But when I cannot help but talk about decentralized science and the fact that there are projects out there that are looking forward to also replace archaic systems present in academia, like peer review processes happening in an independent way, H-score being made redundant, those kind of things. So what is your take on that? And how do you see the role of a professor changing in the next few years?
Well, I can say something about that. Decentralized science is, in effect, I think, the way science should be anyway. Yeah, it should not be gate-capped by editors, by journals, ridiculous metrics that we still use because they're legacy systems in science. So yes, we see initiatives in decentralized science, and the hope is to bring back science, not to something new, but to what it was always supposed to be, a waging of arguments, better ideas that anyone can partake in. And the role of professors, well, my take, honestly, is that, universities are conservative institutions. So people who make it to university, are those the most innovative thinkers? Question mark. Yeah, I mean, you have to ask. I could name some examples from other disciplines where I think people have moved the field, but they suffered greatly because the conventions of their time, the beliefs of their time, were not, there was no fit. Yeah, you can look at Katerin Kaliko with mRNA vaccines. She didn't get any funding because people said, oh, it's ridiculous. Or a Nobel Prize winner who discovered quasi-crystals. He was thrown out of a lab, and Linus Pauling said there are no quasi-crystals, only quasi-scientists. He later on got the Nobel Prize for it. So, I would always distinguish between academia, and academic, gestures and styles, which is very much a culture, and then there's science, and that's innovative, original thinking. So the hallmark of science is originality, and hopefully, DeSci will open up these closed institutions that universities also are, even more, allowing anyone who thinks they have a say on a particular matter to participate, whether they have the right degree or not.
In terms of academics, I think it's the role of the professors to change this, but it's much easier. I mean, we're simply too lazy. So in hiring, it's easier to make a list and say, good age value, let's hire this guy, than to actually read the papers. So that the person published, or the blog entries that they published. And the people who made it then to have other stuff and kind of want to get rid of this work, I guess. Yeah. And it's also key performance indicators. I mean, we at the university, money is allocated based on publications that are in certain top tier journals. So obviously we publish there because otherwise we don't get money. It's always how you set up the key performance indicators.
So I was told
it's changing. It's changing. So there is one ranking, and Philipp scores high on it, and quite rightly so. It's the FAZ ranking of economists, and they use partly some legacy indicators that I don't think are very telling, but they also use some modern indicators. How often is someone in social media? Because that is impact. You know, are you moving the field? Are you moving the discussion? Are you having an impact? And they measure it, and Philipp scores highly. And I don't think you would in a more traditional ranking that looks like it backlagged indicators. So that, you know, we measure not how often has a paper been read, we measure how often has the journal been read in which the paper is published. So completely useless indicator in a way, if you want to assess the impact of individuals. But it's a legacy system that's in place, just in the same way that many banks still program in COBOL, right? They can't change it because it's a legacy thing.
I would also add one, two points here. I think it's a legacy system. That's the perfect word here. It's like the financial system with Deutsche Bank and so on. It will never change, and it cannot. In my personal opinion, it's not able to transform itself. It's like a ship. It's sailing, and until the end of the world, it will be like this. And this opens up the room for new business models because the world is changing. Therefore, think about it, what's happening in the crypto world. What is the core of university? Yes, it's research, but it's also lecturing. How have you learned blockchain technology? It's not a university teaching you. You learned it by listening to podcasts, YouTube, you read papers. People send you a WhatsApp and say, hey, read this, that's interesting. You read it and you read this again and again. Twitter is morphing into a technology education system, right? In case you're following the right people, it's the best education out there you can get for the Web3 field. So this is all education taking place outside of universities. That's what I mean when I say universities. I think they will not change dramatically. They will transform in tiny little bits, also driven by Corona, for example, but not largely. And this opens up the field for new knowledge transmission mechanisms as the ones I've pointed out. You know, look at what we are doing here. We are doing, for example, the talents programs. That's not standard lecturing. That's more like coaching style of thing. We have the one program which is called DLT Talents, which is just for women. And we now have educated 800 women with this program, 800, right? And in total, all our talents program have collected 6,500 applications. Did we get money from the government or from the European Commission? No, but we applied for, but they rejected us, even for the program which is just for women. Imagine this, right?
What did they say, Philipp?
Yeah, doesn't fit in the program, and you know, all kinds of stuff from some bureaucrats. It's horrible. But we know how to deal with it. So what do? We are doing sponsoring stuff. We are trying to be attractive for sponsors, creating awareness for companies, doing conferences here and there, earning a little bit of money, employing people, and then using these people to operate these programs. So we're using, but that's crazy, using sponsoring revenues to educate 800 women. Imagine this. Where is the government here? Where's the Ministry of Finance and the European Commission and the Ministry of Education? That's horrible. That's where I've really felt the system will not change. It will change incrementally, but largely it will not change at all. You are a special person in Austria because you somehow managed the government to really spend a lot of money in the field of blockchain, but we don't have similar things in Germany, not at all.
Well, Austria is a small country and sometimes not so bureaucratic. But the Austrian Blockchain Center, it's not, that the government gives money, but only on top of money that we get from companies. So it works like in Austria, in Christmas, we have a show where if you donate something, the government doubles, and basically we are like this show. So if we get 1,000 euros from a company, we get another 1,000 from the government, but we have to do things that companies want. But this is a very good point. I also gave up writing these proposals to funding and this normal publishing process. I was in an A+ journal for 10 years, senior editor, and I didn't manage to accept one publication because always some referee found something bad. And the only thing you can get something published when you please all the old committee members and make something incrementally that they like. So I gave it up, and the whole other funding, basically it's a tax. Because in Europe you have very high rejection rates. You are forced by the incentive system at the university to write proposals, everybody writing proposals, right? And if you factor in this effort of the lost things, it's a tax, but still we like it because we think it's innovative. That's one reason why I founded the Austrian Blockchain Center, because here, basically, it's easier to get, funny enough, it's easier to get money from companies. And the nice thing in the blockchain space, we have these foundations who also do cool research, and you don't have to wait for long things. And all our indicators are very bad. So these impact factors, they were invented by the libraries to decide which journals to buy. And the big winners of these are the academic bookkeepers at universities who have a very big data warehouse. They count these things. And it's very funny if you know both worlds, if you see the dynamics in the blockchain space, and then you go to one of these academic meetings. That's why recently I don't go so often. They always say the same, yeah? Talking about these fun indicators.
I think we could continue this discussion for a long time. And you officially have 5 minutes left, but I was asked to grant you an additional 5 minutes because our agenda is quite tightly knit to expand the networking a little bit and give everyone the opportunity to perhaps talk to you personally, face to face, out there for breakfast. Thank you very much. Thank you to that fantastic panel, star-studded, 4 professors. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your insights. And I would like to ask you all to get some refreshments, small breakfast outside, and then be back here at 10:45. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.